Okay, so we are now in the lecture proper on the lesson characteristics and principles of human rights under the subject human rights education. And your lecturer is Darlito Bernard G. Delizo, known as Sir D, Tatay D, or Dr. D. And this would be an introductory to the subject human rights education. And the objectives of this lesson is that the learners or the viewers are expected to understand the meaning of human rights and to understand the principles of human rights and to know the different characteristics of human rights after viewing or watching this lecture. And the approach of this lecture is that I use the quiz, multiple choice quiz, to explain the answers as a jumping board for the explanation of the subject matter. So number one question, an infant has human rights because he, she, a citizen of her country of birth. Of course, that's correct. It is guaranteed by the Constitution. Yes, it's correct because that is a birthright. It is provided by the laws of his or her country. Well, that's correct. And letter D, or he, she is simply a human being. Well, all of these are correct actually, but in the principles and meaning of human rights, the best answer would be because that infant is simply a human being. Okay? So, what is human rights? Human rights, these are rights that belong to every individual. Take note, every individual, whether you are a man or a woman, whether you are a girl or a boy, whether you are an infant or elder. Because simply said, you are a human being. That's why you call that human rights. Otherwise, if you are not if you are not a human, then that is animal rights. That infant we were referring, of course, we are referring to an infant, a human being. So, in question number one, he has human rights simply because that infant is a human being. What is human rights? Further explanation on the definition. Okay, human rights, these are the rights that are embodied as basic standards. Okay, these are basic standards without which people cannot realize their inherent human dignity. Take note, the basic human standard. So, when you speak of basic human standard or basic standards, these are including rights as set forth by our tradition, as set forth by our culture, as set forth by our religious teachings, as set forth by the values that we have, the rules, the regulation, and the laws, including the Constitution, the International Declaration of Human Rights, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, and other special laws in our country. So these laws, these basic standards are serving, okay, to guard the human rights of every individual so that we can maintain the inherent human dignity, or we can treat people with human kindness. Okay, so that is the idea of what is human rights. These are the basic standards. They are already set forth so that everyone would be able to realize that we have an inherent human dignity. When you say inherent, that is, we have inherited that. Once you are born, you are already have that human rights. As historical background, question number 2, in 539 BC, Cyrus the Great, the first king of Persia, conquered Babylon. Well, Babylon, that is the modern day Iraq. And Persia, that is the modern day Iran. You have that the Persian Empire. Which of the following was not one of Cyrus the Great's remarkable actions in relation to the advancement of for man or advancement of human rights for man? Well, he freed the slaves. So pinalaya niya yung mga alipin, Then he established uh, political and economic equality, declared that all people had the right to choose their own religion, and established racial equality. So, what is not part of Cyrus the Great's uh, tenets of human rights? Well, that is the establishment of political and economic equality. Because in the empire, or in the Persian Empire, there was still what you call the inequality insofar as politics, or social status and economic status is concerned. Meaning, not all people under the empire of the Persian Empire were given the right to hold some political positions or political rights, as well as the economic rights. So he only freed the slaves, declared that all people had the right to choose their own religion, and established racial equality. But Cyrus the Great, of course, obviously would like to preserve the rights, inherent rights of the Persian people. As a trivia, the writings, it was written from a clay, and you call that the Cyrus Cylinder. So, known today as the Cyrus Cylinder. Well, accordingly, uh, the rights as well as the other decrees were recorded on a baked clay cylinder in the Akkadian language with cuneiform script. Today, that particular human rights principles laid out by Cyrus the Great uh, was already translated to multiple languages in the world. And what is very prominent on that Cyrus cylinder is that it became the world's first charter of human rights. When you say charter, it's a kind of law, or it's a kind of paper, or it's a kind of document, okay, uh, about human rights. Okay, so the world's first charter of human rights. Number three, all but one are the important characteristics of human rights. Okay, so for those of you who are reviewing for the board exam, or reviewing for any kind of multiple choice examination, when you say all but one, it means to say that all of those included to what is being asked, but one means this particular question is asking about the exemption, or what is not included among the important characteristics of human rights. Okay, so the answer here is that letter C. Human rights are alienable. It should be inalienable. Okay, it should be inalienable. So, to understand this particular question, let us comprehensively discuss the different characteristics of human rights. So, these are the characteristics. First, human rights are founded on respect for dignity. Anong ibig sabihin yan? So, kaya nagkaroon ng karapatan pangtao ay nirerespeto ang bilang pagkatao natin. When you say dignity, we have to treat people as people, or as human beings. Iba yung trato natin sa mga hayop, dapat may dignidad or may respeto, may paggalang yung ating pagtrato sa mga tao. Iko-consider natin silang tao. Just like ikaw mismo ay ikaw ay ano ang gusto mo na pagtrato ng mga tao sa iyo bilang isang tao? Because if other people will treat you as not, or like not a human being, then you might say na you are violating my human rights. Hindi tao ang pagtingin nyo sa akin. In fact, that particular principle or characteristic of human rights can be traced from the golden rule set forth by the Lord Jesus Christ, when He said that, do to others what you want others do unto you. Just like if you want to be respected, or if you want that your being a human being will be respected, you should apply it also to other people. Okay? So founded on respect for the dignity and worth, meaning the value, you are valuing, pinapahalagaan mo yung kanyang pagkatao. And it is universal. When you say universal, ito ay pangkalahatan. It is applied equally and without discrimination to all people. Kay ikaw ay itim, kay ikaw ay puti, kay ikaw ay maliit, kay ikaw ay matangkad, what the law provide what the law provides as human rights, you should be granted also. So, the birthright of every member of the human family, something like the right to life, well, that is granted to all human beings who are born in this world. So, it should be universal, it should be worldwide. Although, of course, there are human rights that are practiced in other countries that are not practiced in our country. So with us, we have some human rights which are practiced in our country which are not recognized in other countries as human rights. Okay, but of course, the idea here is that human rights should be applicable to all, regardless of the race, regardless of the place or the religion of that person. And number three, inalienable. When you say inalienable, hindi mo pwedeng tanggalin ito. When you say alien, you do not belong from here. Kapag ikaw ay alien sa ating bansa, it means you do not belong to here. And when you say inalienable, you cannot separate that from a person. So no one can have his or her human rights taken away other than in specific situations. What are these specific situations? These are the things that are provided for by our by our laws. Okay, the right to liberty can be restricted if a person is found guilty of a crime by a court of law. So what does it mean by that? Everyone, okay, every people, every human being has the right to liberty, meaning you can go anywhere else you go. However, once you committed a crime and the law says that you should be arrested, and arresting involves the taking of a person into custody, meaning you are going to restrain the person, and that is a valid reason of taking away that right of a person. So, for us, we cannot lose these rights any more than you can cease to be a human being, meaning habang ikaw ay tao, habang hindi ka tumitigil na nagiging tao, habang ikaw ay tao, habang ikaw ay nabubuhay, ang iyong mga karapatan ay hindi dapat matanggal sa iyo. Unless of course, merong mga provisions ng batas natin na nagsasabi na matatanggal yung karapatan mo na yan. So, indivisible, interrelated, and interdependent. Well, meaning, pag sinabi mo kasing indivisible, interrelated, and interdependent, more or less, natawag natin na ang mayroong isang right na complementary sa iba, tumutulong sa iba, at related sa iba, at hindi mo pwedeng hati-hatiin. So, human rights, no, it is insufficient to respect some human rights and not others. Meaning, hindi pwedeng nire-respeto mo yung karapatan ng iba, but you do not respect also the rights of the others. Okay? In practice, the violation of one's right will often affect the respect of several other rights. So, we have an issue in our country about rights of animals and rights of the people to practice their culture. Say, for example, in the city of Baguio, in the Cordillera. Okay? Generally, in the Cordillera, part of the culture and tradition is kailangan nilang magkatay ng aso at kailangan nilang kumain ng aso in some of the practice of the culture or ritual. Okay? At meron tayong batas na pinagbabawal ang pagkain ng aso. So, paano mo ngayon i-consolidate yan? Okay? So, nire-respeto mo yung rights ng mga hayop, pero ano naman yung karapatan ng mga tao or Cordillerans na i-practice yung kanilang kultura o yung kanilang tradition. So, which is which? Well, if you are going to ask me, I would rather sacrifice the animal rather than sacrificing the respect for the culture of the Cordilleran. So, yun ang mga bagay na mga issues dito. So, all human rights are part of a complementary framework. When you say complementary, nagtutulungan, nagsusuportahan yung rights ng bawat isa. Okay, so to explain further, Patrolman AAA arrested Mr. Rommel Cabanilla while in the act of committing a crime. Arresting a person includes the taking into custody, which I have already mentioned a while back, may include the detention of the said person. In this case, Patrolman AAA's action was, of course, correct. Okay? Because the arrest is valid. Okay? It's valid. Sir, hindi ba pwedeng letter C? Correct, because the arrested person was already guilty. Of course not. He was not yet guilty. Okay? He was only caught while committing a crime. Because insofar as, sir, hindi ba yan ay guilty na siya kasi caught in the act or in flagrante delicto? Well, you have to take note that the conviction whether a person is guilty or not, the process should follow the due process of law, which we call that it hears before it condemns. Okay? Baka naman sa kanyang pag-commit ng crime, totoo nga na na-commit niya yung crime, siya yung pumatay. Pero ano yung mga antecedents nito? It may turn out later on na hindi pala siya guilty because he only acted out of self-defense. And that could be later on be determined by the court. So, in that particular case, he was arrested and placed in custody not because he is already guilty, but rather, okay, the arresting of a person while the person is committing a crime and the person making the arrest, okay, witness the commission of the crime, then that could be a valid arrest and that could be result or that could result to valid detention of the person arrested. So which of the following is not true about human rights? You can be denied a right because the government decides that it is a less important or non-essential. Well, basically, that is not correct. Okay, so which is not true? That is not true. The government will not decide, okay, which one is less important or non-essential because the government, remember, in our bureaucracy, the government could not implement a law without a law or could not complement an action without a law governing such action. So, insofar as the, we call it the whether less or non-essential right, eh dapat yan merong batas na magsasabi na yan ay less important or non-essential. So, wala silang karapatan na magsabi niyan. And the violation of one's right will often affect the respect of several others. Well, yun nga ang sinasabi natin. Minsan, say for example, no, yung isang known drug pusher, napatay siya. Okay? So allegedly ay tinatawag natin na yun ay extrajudicial killing. So the person who killed the person violated the right to life of that person. However, the killing of that person may also affect the rights of others. Ano yung right nila? Karapatan nilang mamuhay sa isang safe at peaceful na lugar. So, maapektuhan yon. So, maaring tinatawag natin mas, kumbaga, magiging peaceful yung kanilang pamumuhay. No? So, it will affect the rights to have a peaceful community. All human rights should therefore be seen as having equal importance, meaning lahat ng human rights dapat yan pari-parehas yan importante. The right to life, the right to liberty, the right to property, and all political, economic, and civil rights dapat yan pari-parehas walang mas mahalaga, kundi lahat yan ay mahalaga. And all human rights are part of a complementary framework. Nagtutulungan yung rights. Okay, while we promote, we call it a particular right, it also enhances the practice of rights of others. Okay, so how is that? We will explain that. The right of the wealthy to choose their place of abode or residence should also be accorded to the poor because human rights are. So, kung ano yung karapatan ng mayayaman na makapamili ng kanilang titirhan, okay, or pagpapatayo ng bahay, ay kailangan maibigay din ito sa mga mahirap dahil, okay, what is that principle or characteristic of right? Well, because rights are, okay, universal para sa lahat ng tao. Yung rights na yan ay tinatawag natin yung pagpili mo ng tahanan mo, ng titirhan mo, that is a universal rights. Okay, that is a universal right na dapat yan ibigay kahit kaninong tao. Ayan, okay? So, what about respect the dignity of all human beings? Marami yan eh. For example, yung right to privacy. Oh, meron siyang mga photographs yung tao na ginagawa niya sa kanyang kwarto. Ayan. Ang ginawa mo ay tawag natin na nakita mo yon, ninakaw mo, pinost mo pa sa Facebook. So you have violated the right to privacy. Nasira tuloy yung dignidad ng tao. Okay, there was a time in somewhere in Ilocos Norte, I suppose, or taga Manila siya or whatsoever, no? Something like that. Pero ang alam ko from Ilocos Norte. Itong babaeng ito ay nagpagawa ng cellphone. At sa cellphone niya, meron pala siyang mga selfie na ginaganap doon sa kanyang pagligo. Ito namang mga gumagawa ng cellphone, na-retrieve nila, ipinost nila ito. Oh. So nasira yung dignidad ng tao. And that is what you call a disrespect to the dignity of that woman. Kaya bawal yon. So mag-ingat din kayo, no? Na kapag mayroon kayong cellphone, nagpapagawa kayo, mga laptop ninyo, well, ito ang katotohanan yan. Kahit yan ay tinatawag natin na delete mo yung mga files mo diyan, yung mga scandal na mga pictures mo diyan, merong pagkakataon or merong possibility na yan ay ma-retrieve ng mga gumagawa ng mga laptop or mga cellphones. Kaya mag-ingat kayo. Okay? Better still na wag niyong gagawin yan. So the foundations and principles of human rights, these are almost the same with the characteristics of a human right. So when you say foundation, ito yung pinaka-basis. Kanina pag sinabi mong characteristics, you are describing ano ba ang human rights at ano ba dapat ang human rights. Ito namang foundation, sinasabi mo ano yung basis. Foundation means ano yung kinakatayuan or paano ito founded, meaning paano ito nag-originate. Unang-una, yung equality, universality, second, third, non-discrimination, number 4, indivisibility, and number 5, interdependence, and finally, responsibility. Okay, so what does it mean by equality? Under the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, Article 1, it says in there that the basis of human right is the principle that all human beings are born free and equal in dignity and rights. So kapare-parehas yung timbang natin. Pare-parehas na ikaw ay tao or tayo ay tao. Kaya sinasabi doon na kaya ang human rights is nakabase yan doon sa prinsipyo that lahat tayo ay ipinanganak na malaya at parihas ang dignidad bilang tao at karapatan. All men are created equal. Universality, as we have mentioned a while back, sa characteristic. So, pag sinabi mong foundational principle of human rights, sinasabi mo na dapat, okay, lahat yan, all throughout the world, dapat yan ay ino-observe or ini-implement. There are certain moral and ethical values that are shared in all regions of the world. Say for example, sa mga Muslim countries, okay? So meron silang pari-parihas na mga moral and ethical values. Sa mga Christian countries, sa mga non-Christian countries, they have the commonalities insofar as certain or some moral and ethical values. Okay? And of course, the government who are, okay, covering, or those government, okay, in those countries, they have to recognize and uphold those moral and ethical values. Okay? However, okay, these human rights cannot be changed, or that they are experienced in the same manner by all people. What does it mean by that? Okay? As I mentioned a while ago, although there is what you call the principle of universality, the problem is that mayroon tayong pagkakaiba in some moral and ethical values insofar as religious belief is concerned. Say for example, if you are in the classroom in the Philippines, it is okay for us. We have the right to choose wherever we would like to sit in the classroom, whether you are beside a woman or a man, or a member of an LGBTQ family. But in some other countries, particularly Muslim countries, hindi pa pwede na igiit mo yung right mo na mayroon kang karapatan, mayroon kang kalayaan na mamili kung saan ka upo, because they have that certain moral and ethical values. Sa kanila, unethical at napaka-immoral na magkatabi ang babae at lalaki na hindi mag-asawa sa mga public places. Okay, including public transportation. That is the idea. Though there should be a universality of rights, take note that that universality of rights, okay, nagkakaroon ng differences insofar as religious, moral, and ethical values. Okay, ang mga universal rights natin, yung mga right to liberty, right to life, right to property, okay, those are we call it the universal rights. Of course, titignan ulit natin yan later on as we discuss the provisions of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. So, ayan ang ibig sabihin niyan, okay? So, pag sinabi mong equality, yan in the middle, pari-parihas na binigyan sila ng pari-parihas na tungtungan. The only problem is hindi na parehas na nakikita yung pinapanood. So, sa right to life, parang ganon. Everyone is given equality, given as the right to life. Okay? However, mayroong tinatawag na equity. Ano yan? Yung pagbibigay ng mas maraming pribilehyo dun sa mga less in law. Okay? So, ano mga yon? Say for example, okay, sinasabi palagi ni Duterte na mauuna yung mga poorest of the poor. Pag dumating yung bakuna, mauuna yung poorest of the poor. So anong point niya? Para magkaroon ng equity. So in other words, somehow yung universality ng rights na dapat mabigyan lahat ng benepisyo under the government, sometimes hindi yan na-observe because of the observance of equity. Okay? That's why in reality, minsan, okay, may mga nakakalamang sa rights ng or sa practice ng ating human rights. Of course, we are going to discuss that later on when we speak of violations of human rights. In defense of Senate Bill number 1563, or the lowering of the height requirements for the uniformed personnel of the Tri-Bureau and the Bureau of Corrections, Senator De La Rosa said, if we continue to allow physical attributes as the basis of entry into government service, and if as legislators we have only done so little to change this practice, are we not shortchanging our people, the Filipinos who gave us our legislative mandate? His statement supports what principle of human rights. Anong principle niyan? That is the principle of equality or non-discrimination. Okay? that is called non-discrimination. So sabi niya, mayroong discrimination. Dati kasi ang sabi, nadi-discriminate daw ang mga indigenous people. I myself and my wife, meron kaming blood as IP people. Okay? Pero nakikita ko na in my personal opinion, nagiging discriminatory yung height waiver accorded to IP people, nagiging discriminatory ito sa mga non-IP people. Kasi sa pag-iikot ko ng Pilipinas ay almost the same naman ang height ng mga tao. Okay? You belong to the IP group or non-IP, almost the same naman yung height ng mga tao. So parang nagkaroon ng discrimination. Okay? So sinasabi niya na ito ay ibigay natin yung karapatan to be employed in the Tri-Bureau and in the Bureau of Corrections. Dapat walang ma-discriminate dahil sa kanyang physical attributes. Dapat ang basis niyan ay yung kanyang commitment, yung kanyang skills and capabilities and competence. Okay? By the way, may mga nagtatanong, Sir, enough na ba yung Senate Bill number 1563 upang hindi na kami kukuha ng height waiver, kaming mga hindi nakakuha ng pagpapala ng katangkaran? The answer there is no, my dear children, my dear watchers, okay, my dear viewers. Kasi ganito yon. In the Philippines, bago maging isang batas ang isang bill, dapat yan, merong batas, merong bill, proposed bill sa Senado, at merong parallel bill doon sa lower house sa Kongreso. Parallel meaning nagko-complement sila. So that pag na-approve sa Senado, ma-approve din sa lower house, then i-consolidate yan, okay, and eventually, pag na-approve sa lower house yung isa, na-approve sa upper house yung isa, i-consolidate yan, then magiging batas na yan. That's the idea. Kaya, wala pang kaliwanagan yan. Pero, this is a good news. A week ago, Congressman Villaferte of, I think, Bicol region, somewhere in Bicol, ay nag-propose ng parallel bill sa lower house, lowering the height requirement. So, you pray, kayong mga kulang sa height, you pray that by the end of the year or early next year, okay, ma-approve na doon sa lower house yung kanilang proposed bill parallel to Senate Bill number 1563, so that mawala na yung discrimination sa height ng mga non-IP people. So further, non-discrimination principle of human rights says that affording the same rights and responsibilities equally to all women and men, boys and girls, by virtue of their humanity. Kasi parehas kayong mga tao eh. Okay? Regardless of any rule or relationship they may have. Regardless na ikaw ay, tawag natin na ikaw ay matangkad o hindi. So, sa idea kasi kanina ng question number 7 natin is mayroong we call it perceived discrimination towards the non-IP people. So, nagiging favorable yon sa mga IP groups of people. So, President Rodrigo Duterte vetoed the law. When you say vetoed, pinawalang visa niya. So, balikan natin kanina. Sabi ko, a bill to become a law, there should be parallel bills, okay, approved by the upper and the lower houses of the Congress. Then after that, the proposed law now will be submitted to the office of the President. And the President is given 15 days to review that. Re-review niya. Paano niya re-reviewin? Meron siyang mga legal consultants at ipapakita niya sa mga stakeholders, sa mga would-be beneficiaries ng batas na yan at mga maapektuhan ng batas na yan. Then, kung walang contradiction, pipirmahan niya yon. Otherwise, kung nakita niya, constitutional yung contradictions, then i-veto niya ito, pawawalang sala niya. So in here, there was a law, proposed law, para tanggalin ang corporal punishment na ginagawa ng mga parents para i-discipline ang kanilang mga anak, yung pamamalo. Pero sabi ni President Duterte, hindi ko i-approve yan, pawawalang bisa ko yan. So the President said, the parents should not be denied of the rights to discipline their children. The justification of Duterte in vetoing the law supports the principle of human rights, which is what you call interdependence. In other words, yung karapatan ng bata na hindi mapalo ay nakadepende yan sa karapatan din ng magulang na magdisiplina sa kanyang anak. Okay, that is the idea. Kaya interdependence yung karapatan ng bata, okay, at yung karapatan ng mga magulang sa pagdidisiplina. Provided, of course, it will not result to abuse, sexual, physical, and psychological abuse. Kahit sa Bible, sinasabi rin yan sa Proverbs, sinasabi doon that do not spare the rod to discipline your children. Kailangan gumamit ka rin ng pamalo, provided hindi yan mag-cause ng abuse sa bata. Okay? So, what else? Interdependence applies in all spheres of life. So, lahat, okay, sa school, sa bahay, sa kumpanya, sa government and non-government institutions, sa churches, lahat yan. Okay? Merong tinatawag nating interdependence yung rights. So, human right violations are interconnected. Okay? So, kapag the parents abuse the right of a child, nasubrahan niyang pamamalo, so basically, we call it, it is now interconnected on other human rights. Loss of one right detracts from other rights. What does it mean by that? Okay? So pag tinanggalan mo ng rights yung isa, practically ay matatanggal na rin yung rights niyang iba. Okay? So promotion of human rights in one area supports other human rights. Okay? Say for example, you support or you promote the rights of the children to be educated. Well, it supports now the economic rights of the children, and also it supports their civil rights, di ba? So marami yan, interdependent yan. So may effect yung pag-observe at pag-violate natin ng mga human rights. So number 9, providing separate and exclusive restrooms or toilets for the third sex is a protection of the privacy rights of the women. On the other hand, supporters of the SOGI bill say that gays should be allowed to use restrooms for women. To settle these contradicting propositions, the legislators should look into the social, political, cultural, economic, and civic aspects of the issue before approving it into law. Meaning, merong mga maapektuhan. Therefore, that particular principle of right involves what you call the principle of indivisible. Hindi mo pwedeng ihiwalay. Hindi mo pwedeng ihiwalay yung rights ng mga kababaihan. Hindi mo pwedeng ihiwalay yung rights ng mga gay, mga bakla sa rights ng mga lalaki. Kaya naging issue yan. Okay? So, anong ibig sabihin yan? Okay? Yung papayagan kasi, yung bakla na iihi sa mga babae, well, that will cause a problem later on. Paano kung gusto mong maging makakita ng mga katawan ng babae? Magbakla-baklahan ka, pasok ka sa CR ng babae. So you will be we call it violating also the rights to privacy. O kaya yung bakla dahil sa katitingin sa mga sa katawan ng babae sa CR ng mga babae, naging lalaki siya. 'Di ba? So those are the things na kailangan makita yung other rights ng mga tao, 'di ba? So mas maganda 'yan siguro magkaroon ng separate na CR only for the LGBTQ community. Diba? Providing separate and exclusive restrooms or toilets for the third sex. That is the idea. Kasi tawag natin, ihiwalay mo na lamang sila. Okay? Sa pure na mga lalaki at saka mga babae. Okay? So that is the indivisible principle of human rights. So yan yung panahon na pwede mong i-divide. Kasi may mababiolate na tinatawag natin rights, yung right to privacy ng mga babae. Okay? Pero kung ipopromote mo na dapat yung lalaki para sa lalaki, well, because you cannot divide rights for women and rights for men. So, indivisibility means should be addressed as an indivisible body. Meaning, sabi nga kanina, ay dapat tignan muna yung social, civil, political, economic, cultural, and collective rights bago mo approvean yung CR. Because, hindi mo nga pwedeng i-separate yung right na yan doon sa ibang mga rights na accorded sa ibang mga tao. Kaya, that principle is principle of indivisibility or indivisible. Hindi pwedeng hatiin or ihiwalay sa ibang rights. Number 10, the right of an arrested person to be granted the benefits of preliminary investigation is a government responsibility. So, mayroong responsibility sa human rights, meaning meron tayong dapat gawin upang ma-observe ang human rights. Okay? So, yung preliminary investigation is a government responsibility under the prosecution. Sir, hindi ba sa pulis yan? Take note, arrested person yan. Kapag ang tao ay arrested, meaning meron ng kinandak na initial investigation ng pulis. So when we speak of preliminary investigation under the prosecution, when the person is already arrested by virtue of warrant of arrest. Okay, kung saan magkakandak ito ng tinatawag natin ng inquest. Okay? Inquest proceeding, kasama dyan yung preliminary investigation. Okay? Na kung saan i-determine whether merong prima facie evidence na arestuhin or ikulong yung tao. Okay? So, iba yung preliminary investigation ng police. So, responsibility, may responsibility ang mga government natin, government people, meron tayong individual na responsibility at may mga responsibility ng ibang mga entities of the government and non-government. So, human rights are not gifts, hindi ito mga regalo bestowed at the pleasure of the government. Hindi ito gawa ng gobyerno natin, ito ay gawa ng sanlibutan at gawa ng buong society natin. Kaya, we have what you call the social contract theory, na whatever laws implemented in the country and whatever contents of the Constitution, that is an assumed agreement of the entirety of the Philippine Republic. Kaya the element of the states, which is the government, they are not the one who are bestowing the rights of the people, because that is embodied in the Constitution, embodied in our laws, and the Constitution and other laws are, we call it an agreement of the people. Nor should the government withhold them. Hindi nila pwedeng i-withhold yan or i-apply nila sa iba. Okay? Ayan. Otherwise, they must be held accountable. Kasi meron ng violation of human rights. Ayan. Okay? Individual responsibility. Every individual has a responsibility to teach human rights. Lahat tayo. Sa mga nakakaalam, dapat ituro. Okay? Sa mga nakakaalam ng human rights, dapat respetuhin natin yung human rights ng iba. Diba? Ano nangyayari? Okay? Dito sa Baguio, we have what you call the Silent Night Ordinance. Ano yung Silent Night Ordinance? Kapag malapit ng mag-midnight, 10 o'clock I suppose, bawal na yung mga nag-aawitan ng mga karaoke ng malakas. Why? Okay? Yes, you have the right to use your property. You have the right to sing loud. but you are encroaching on the rights of other people. Right nila upang magpahinga. Okay? So, we call it, alam mo yan na karapatan din ng kapitbahay na magpahinga, pag alam mong tulugan time na, wag nang mag-iingay sa yung karaoke. Okay? Kahit puro 100 yung score mo. Kasi may karapatan silang matulog. That's the idea. So, that is your individual responsibility to respect the rights of others. And to challenge institution, meaning pag alam mo na meron ng mga institutions, government and non-government institutions that are seemingly violating human rights, then you have to, we call it, to do your individual responsibility to report. Okay? And to report to authorities that there is an ongoing violation of human rights. Okay? So to challenge institutions and individuals that abuse the human rights. So kapag alam mo may nag-iingay sa kapitbahay, nagpapatigil, ilang linggo na, so i-report mo. No? Just like one time in our place, merong every 9 to 10 or between 9 to 11 in the evening, biglang may kotse na umiikot sa amin na kala mo nakipagkarera. Okay? So, some concerned citizens, nireport nila sa authorities, including us. Nag-report kami. Well, that is our individual responsibility kasi they are now violating our rights also as human being na magkaroon ng mahimbing na pagtulog sa gabi. It happened mga April or May, kasagsagan ng quarantine natin. And other responsible entities, every organ of society, the church, okay, the civic organizations, corporations, non-government and government foundations, including schools, everything, they also share responsibility for the promotion and protection of human rights. Meaning, sa mga school dapat pinapractice, tinuturo, okay? Sa mga institution dapat inobserve nilang human rights, okay? They do their thing in the promotion of human rights. That is the responsibility of everyone, okay? So those are the foundations or the basis of the principles of human rights. And these are some of the frequently asked questions. What is the main purpose why there is human rights? So, the main purpose, human rights exist to preserve equality among all men. That's the first purpose. Okay? Para magkaroon ng pagkakaparihas ang bawat tao. And equality begets non-discrimination. Meaning, kapag yan ay tinatawag natin na na-observe ang pagkapari-parehas ng mga tao sa kanilang karapatan, ito'y manganganak ng non-discrimination. Begets means panganganak or pagpamumunga. Kaya nga, Jesus Christ is the only begotten. Okay? Begotten child, Son of God. Okay? Pinanganak or prutas ang ibig sabihin niyan. Okay? So, it will cause non-discrimination. And with the presence equality, okay, kapag meron ng equality, probably mawawala ang hindi pagkakaunawaan. Okay, conflict will cease within the society because na-observe ang mga civil, economic, political, religious rights of the people. Okay? And what else? Is human rights education necessary? Yeah, that is necessary. Okay? Remember that ignorance of the law excuses no one. Hindi mo pwedeng sabihin, hindi ko kasi alam na bawal. May karapatan pala siyang ganito. No. At the same time, ignorance also causes some people to commit crime because they do not know. Okay? Ano yung para sa kanila? Kaya patuloy na na-abuse sila at patuloy na may nang-aabuso ng nagba-violate kasi hindi alam ang karapatan na ipinaglalaban. Okay, so human rights education will enlighten everyone. In fact, tinuturo dapat yan mula pa sa elementary. Okay, about what are the different rights of person that is being protected by law so that no one will be abused and it will be disadvantaged by anyone. Okay, so those are the introduction of the meaning of human rights, the characteristics and the foundational principles, and a very brief history of human rights. Okay. So with that, thank you for watching. Again, do not forget to click the subscribe button and notification bell